In the highlands of Ethiopia, within ancient monasteries carved into mountain cliffs, monks guard something extraordinary, something that challenges everything you thought you knew about the Bible. While the Protestant Bible contains 66 books and the Catholic Bible contains 73, the Ethiopian Orthodox Tewahedo Church has preserved 81 canonical books. But this isn't just about numbers, it's about what those additional texts contain. According to manuscript evidence preserved in the Garima Gospels, dating between the 4th and 6th centuries, Ethiopia maintained biblical texts that were systematically removed everywhere else in the Christian world. Dr. Kurt Nickham from Abilene Christian University has documented how Ethiopia's geographical isolation created an unintended consequence. It became a time capsule, preserving early Christian texts that Roman church councils later deemed too controversial. The Book of Enoch, the Book of Jubilees from Esdras, the Ascension of Isaiah. These aren't obscure footnotes, these are complete books, written in Ge'ez, the ancient Ethiopian liturgical language, that contain detailed expansions of the laws Moses received on Mount Sinai. What historians have uncovered is staggering. While the Council of Laodicea in 363 CE began systematically removing books from the biblical canon, Ethiopia never received that memo. The Ethiopian Church, established according to tradition by the eunuch baptized by Philip in Acts 8, developed independently from Rome and Constantinople. Archaeological evidence from the Abba Garima monastery demonstrates unbroken manuscript traditions spanning over 1600 years. These aren't copies of copies degraded through translation. These are primary sources in their original language, maintained by communities who never underwent the canonical revisions that swept through Europe. Dr. James Vanderkam from the University of Notre Dame spent decades studying the Dead Sea Scrolls discovered at Qumran. His research revealed something extraordinary. Fragments of the Book of Enoch and the Book of Jubilees found in those caves match nearly word for word with the complete versions preserved in Ethiopia. This means Ethiopian scribes maintained accurate transmission of texts that elsewhere existed only as fragments or were completely lost. But here's where it gets profound. The texts preserved in Ethiopia don't just add stories or genealogies. They contain additional commandments, specific laws that Moses received alongside the famous 10 Commandments. Laws about timekeeping, about angelic witnesses, about economic justice, about calendrical observance. When researchers gained access to Ethiopian monastery libraries in the 19th and 20th centuries, they discovered something that had been hidden from Western Christianity for over 500 years. The Mosaic Law was far more comprehensive than the sanitized version presented in Exodus and Deuteronomy. The question isn't whether these texts are authentic. Fragments found in the Qumran caves prove their ancient origin. The question is, why were they removed everywhere except Ethiopia? What was so threatening about these additional commandments that church councils systematically purged them from the canon? Ethiopia stands as the last guardian of a fuller biblical tradition, a tradition that includes not just narratives, but explicit legal codes that someone decided humanity shouldn't follow. What you're about to discover isn't speculation. It's documented in manuscripts you can visit today. It's confirmed by archaeological evidence from the Dead Sea Scrolls. It's preserved in a living church tradition that predates the Roman canonization process. The evidence suggests that what we call the complete Bible is actually an edited version. And the unedited manuscript has been sitting in Ethiopian monasteries this entire time, waiting for the world to be ready for what it contains. The Book of Jubilees begins with a statement that should fundamentally alter how you understand biblical history. This is the account of the division of days of the law and of the testimony, according to their weeks and their years, as the angel of the presence spoke to Moses on Mount Sinai when he went up to receive the tablets of the law and the commandment. According to this text, preserved completely in Ethiopian Ge'ez and partially in Hebrew fragments from Qumran Cave 4, Moses received far more than the 10 Commandments on that mountain. He received a comprehensive retelling of Genesis with additional laws woven throughout, laws that never made it into the canonical Torah. Dr. James Vanderkam, whose scholarly work on Jubilees at the University of Notre Dame is considered authoritative, explains that this text was composed in the 2nd century BCE and was considered scripture by early Jewish communities. The Dead Sea Scrolls contain 15 fragmentary copies of Jubilees, suggesting it was among the most important texts at Qumran. But here's what makes Jubilees revolutionary. It doesn't just retell Genesis and Exodus. It adds specific commandments allegedly given by God through angels to Moses. Commandments about maintaining a solar calendar instead of a lunar one. Laws about angelic hierarchies and their role in human affairs. Regulations about proper timekeeping for festivals and Sabbaths. The text claims these weren't suggestions or cultural practices. These were divine mandates, delivered with the same authority as "Thou shalt not murder." Yet somehow these commandments vanished from the official biblical record. Research by Dr. Betsy Halpern Amaru from Vassar College demonstrates that Jubilees expands nearly every major narrative in Genesis with legal material. When it describes Abraham, it adds laws Abraham supposedly followed. When it recounts Isaac, it includes commandments Isaac received. The entire book functions as a legal expansion of the Genesis narrative, attributing dozens of laws to divine revelation that the canonical Bible never mentions. Early church fathers knew about Jubilees. Epiphanius mentions it in the 4th century. The apostolic constitutions reference it. Even the New Testament shows awareness of its traditions. Yet by the time Jerome compiled the Latin Vulgate in the early 5th century, Jubilees had been relegated to the category of apocrypha, interesting but not authoritative. Ethiopia never got that memo. For Ethiopian Christians, Jubilees remained divinely inspired scripture, equal in authority to Genesis itself, and within its pages lie commandments that Moses allegedly hid or that were systematically removed from the canonical record. The manuscript evidence is undeniable. Fragments from the 1st century BCE prove Jubilees existed before Christianity. Its preservation in Ethiopia proves it was once widely regarded as scripture. Its absence from Western Bibles proves someone made a conscious decision to exclude it. What was in those additional commandments that made them unsuitable for inclusion? What did Moses allegedly teach that church councils decided humanity shouldn't follow? We're living in times when ancient prophecies are unfolding before our very eyes. Yet most people remain in the dark, trapped in incomplete truths that have been carefully concealed from humanity for centuries. Now consider this. What if the very texts that were removed from Scripture contain the answers you've been seeking all along? Answers that can illuminate your path, strengthen your understanding, and reveal the authentic purpose behind the story of Jesus. That's why I've prepared a powerful digital book for you. Why did the apostles hide Jesus' most dangerous words? This isn't just a book, it's a spiritual awakening, a tool for those who desire to go beyond the surface, break free from manipulation, and reconnect with the authentic Christ, without filters, without distortions, without human agendas. Download it now. The link is available in the first pinned comment. But be aware, this content could be removed at any time. It contains spiritually sensitive revelations that make even religious leaders uncomfortable. Don't wait until the world crumbles to seek what your soul already knows it needs. Click now, download your copy, and allow this truth to begin transforming your understanding. And if you're one of the first to download it, come back here and write truth. That will be your act of faith. And perhaps today, a door will open that you never imagined was about to reveal itself. Hidden within the Book of Jubilees lies what scholars now recognize as one of the most controversial commandments Moses allegedly received, a complete reformation of how humanity measures sacred time. According to Jubilees 6:32-38, God commanded Moses to follow a solar calendar of exactly 364 days, divided into 4 equal seasons of 91 days each. This wasn't a suggestion for agricultural convenience. The text presents it as a divine mandate, equal in authority to keeping the Sabbath or honoring parents. Dr. Gabriele Boccaccini from the University of Michigan, whose research on Second Temple Judaism is widely respected, explains that this calendar represented a fundamental theological dispute in ancient Judaism. The solar calendar of 364 days meant that festivals would fall on the same day of the week every year. The first day of the year would always be a Wednesday, the day, according to Genesis, when God created the sun and moon. The Qumran community, whose library included 15 copies of Jubilees, strictly followed this solar calendar. Excavations at Qumran revealed sundials and calendar texts, showing their absolute commitment to this system. According to their understanding, Following the lunar calendar used by the Jerusalem temple wasn't just wrong. It was a violation of divine law revealed to Moses. But here's where it becomes fascinating. The temple establishment in Jerusalem followed a lunar calendar, adding a 13th month periodically to align with solar years. This meant the Qumran community celebrated Passover, Pentecost, and the Day of Atonement on completely different dates than the official priesthood. Jubilee 6:36-37 contains explicit condemnation of those who follow lunar calendars. And all the children of Israel will forget and will not find the path of the years, and will forget the new moons and seasons and Sabbaths, and they will go wrong as to all the order of the years. According to this text, Moses commanded that abandoning the 364-day solar calendar would lead to Israel's apostasy. It wasn't a minor calendrical preference, it was presented as the foundation of proper worship. When Rome consolidated Christianity in the 4th century, the solar calendar of Jubilees represented a problem. The Julian calendar had 365 days. Jewish communities used lunar calendars. Adopting the Jubilees calendar would have required creating a completely separate temporal system just for Christians. Dr. Annie Joubert, whose research at the French National Center for Scientific Research examined early Christian calendar systems, documented how some early Christian communities did follow variations of the Jubilees calendar. The Gospel of John's chronology of Jesus' final week differs from the Synoptic Gospels in ways that suggest different calendar systems. But as Christianity became the official religion of the Roman Empire, such diversity became untenable. A unified church required unified feast days. The solar calendar of Jubilees, with its implicit condemnation of all other systems, couldn't coexist with imperial standardization. So what happened? The Book of Jubilees, with its Commandment 11 about proper timekeeping, was removed from the canon everywhere except Ethiopia. The Ethiopian Orthodox Church to this day uses a calendar system influenced by Jubilees' solar reckoning. The evidence suggests that one of Moses' alleged commandments, how to measure time itself, was deemed incompatible with institutional Christianity, not because it was false, but because it was inconvenient. A law about something as fundamental as how to count days was erased from the biblical record, which raises an uncomfortable question. What other commandments were removed, not for theological reasons, but for political ones? Have you ever heard about the solar calendar Moses actually commanded, the 364-day year that Qumran communities died defending? Share your thoughts in the comments. I'm fascinated to learn what our community already knows about this calendrical controversy. Your insights might illuminate something others haven't considered yet. The Book of Jubilees contains one of the most extraordinary claims in ancient religious literature. Angels aren't just messengers or warriors. According to this text, they're permanent witnesses to human covenants, legally bound to record and testify about humanity's adherence to divine law. Jubilees 1:27-29 describes Moses receiving this revelation. And do thou write for thyself all these words which I declare unto thee this day, for I know their rebellion and their stiff neck, before I bring them into the land of which I swear to their fathers. And they will forget all my commandments, even all that I command them, and they will walk after the Gentiles. And there will be no power to intercede with me on their behalf, for I shall remember the evil which they have done, and none will be able to make intercession for them. The implication is staggering. Angelic beings serve as cosmic court reporters, documenting every covenant violation for future judgment. This isn't just theological poetry. Jubilees presents a detailed hierarchy of angels with specific legal functions. The angel of the presence, who narrates the entire book to Moses, functions as a kind of divine attorney, explaining laws and their eternal consequences. Dr. Michael Siegel, from the Hebrew University of Jerusalem, whose research focuses on Second Temple period angelology, explains that Jubilees reflects a worldview where angels actively participate in the legal structure of the universe. They don't just observe, they testify, advocate, and execute judgment. The Book of Enoch, also preserved in Ethiopian canon, expands this concept dramatically. Enoch 89:90 presents a vision of world history where angels record human actions in books that will be opened at final judgment. Specific angels have responsibility for recording specific types of sins. Early Christian texts show awareness of this teaching. Jude 1:14-15 directly quotes the Book of Enoch. Behold, "The Lord cometh with 10,000s of his saints, to execute judgment upon all." This isn't a casual reference, it's an explicit endorsement of Enoch's angelic witness theology. Yet by the 4th century, prominent church fathers began rejecting this entire framework. Augustine explicitly argued against the Book of Enoch, partly because its angelology seemed too elaborate, too legally mechanical. The Council of Laodicea in 363 CE went further, prohibiting prayers to angels and effectively dismantling the entire angelic witness theology. What remained in the canonical Bible were sanitized angel stories, messengers, warriors, worshippers, but not the legal witnesses described in Jubilees and Enoch. The commandment to recognize angelic testimony, to live knowing that divine witnesses record every covenant violation, was systematically removed. Ethiopia preserved it. In Ethiopian Orthodox theology, angelic intercession remains central. The liturgy includes prayers acknowledging angelic witnesses. The full Book of Enoch remains scripture, not apocrypha. The evidence suggests Commandment 12, recognize and honor angelic witnesses to your covenants, was deemed too superstitious, too legally complex, or perhaps too psychologically burdensome for mass Christianity. But the Dead Sea Scrolls prove this was mainstream Jewish theology in the Second Temple period. Early Christians knew and quoted these texts. Only later canonization removed them. Which means Moses may have taught a theology of cosmic legal accountability that church councils decided was better left forgotten. You no longer have to carry this weight alone. Awaken to the forgotten truths with the digital book, Why Did the Apostles Hide Jesus' Most Dangerous Words? The link is in the first pinned comment. Click now and receive your copy before it's taken down. In 2010, researchers using radiocarbon dating confirmed what Ethiopian monks had claimed for centuries. The Garima Gospels, housed in the Abba Garima Monastery, date to between 330 and 650 CE, making them among the oldest surviving illuminated Christian manuscripts in the world. But the Garima Gospels represent just the tip of an extraordinary archive. According to Dr. Jacques Mercier, former director of research at the French National Center for Scientific Research, Ethiopia possesses the largest collection of pre-15th century Christian manuscripts outside Europe. And unlike European manuscripts that underwent multiple translations, Hebrew to Greek to Latin to vernacular languages, Ethiopian texts were translated directly from Greek and Hebrew into Ge'ez in the 4th to 6th centuries, and then preserved without further alteration. This creates something unprecedented in biblical studies, a control group, a way to see what early Christian scripture looked like before the canonical revisions of the late 4th and 5th centuries. What researchers discovered is extraordinary. The Ethiopian Bible contains complete versions of texts that exist elsewhere only as fragments or later translations. The complete Book of Enoch, the complete Book of Jubilees, 1 Esdras, the Prayer of Manasseh, the Ascension of Isaiah, each preserved in their ancient Ge'ez translations, predating most European manuscripts by centuries. Dr. Ephraim Isaac, former president of the International Organization for Septuagint and Cognate Studies, spent decades studying Ethiopian biblical manuscripts. His research demonstrates that Ethiopian scribes maintained extraordinary textual accuracy. Comparing different manuscript copies separated by centuries shows minimal variation, suggesting a highly disciplined transmission process. But here's what makes this physically powerful. You can visit these manuscripts today. The Abba Garima Monastery, the Debre Damo Monastery, the libraries at Gondar. They contain tangible, datable, physical evidence of what early Christianity considered scripture. When Western scholars first encountered these manuscripts in the 19th century, the response was dismissive. How could illiterate African monks possess biblical texts unknown to European universities? The racism of that era prevented serious engagement with Ethiopian manuscript evidence for decades. Dr. Steve Delamata from George Fox University led a multi-year digitization project of Ethiopian manuscripts. What his team discovered challenged prevailing assumptions. Ethiopian scribes weren't copying European texts that somehow got corrupted. They were preserving independent textual traditions that predated European canonization. The physical evidence proves censorship occurred not through book burning, but through selective non-copying. When Jerome created the Latin Vulgate around 400 CE, He chose which books to translate and which to exclude. Scribes across Europe copied his Vulgate. Books he excluded simply stopped being copied. Within a few generations, they existed only as references in footnotes. But Ethiopia never used the Vulgate. Ethiopian Christians translated directly from Greek and Hebrew sources, creating their canon before Rome finalized its official list. By the time the Council of Rome in 382 CE declared 66 books canonical, Ethiopian Christianity had already been established for 3 centuries with its own textual traditions. The Ge'ez manuscripts prove that what Western Christianity calls apocrypha was once considered fully canonical scripture. These aren't late medieval forgeries or mystical additions. These are texts that fragments from Qumran confirm existed in the 2nd century BCE and that Ethiopian Christians have continuously regarded as divinely inspired for 1700 years. Carbon dating doesn't lie. Paleographic analysis doesn't lie. The physical manuscripts exist. You can request access to digital archives from the Ethiopian Manuscript Imaging Project. This isn't faith. It's forensic bibliography. The evidence preserved in Ethiopian monasteries proves that biblical canonization was a process of subtraction. Books were removed, texts were excluded, commandments were censored. And the physical proof of what was lost survives in the highlands of Ethiopia. If these discoveries are challenging your understanding in profound ways, I invite you to join our exclusive membership community. Here you'll find a fellowship of seekers who, like you, refuse to settle for incomplete truths. We go deeper. We examine manuscripts. We question official narratives. We support each other in this journey toward fuller understanding. Become a member now. The Book of Jubilees contains some of the most stringent marriage laws ever attributed to divine revelation. Laws so restrictive that they essentially prohibited interfaith marriage, interethnic marriage, and even marriages between certain tribes within Israel itself. According to Jubilees 37:17, Moses received explicit commandments about maintaining bloodline purity. And if there is any man who wishes in Israel to give his daughter or his sister to any man who is of the seed of the Gentiles, he shall surely die, and they shall stone him with stones, for he hath wrought shame in Israel. And there is no redemption forever for all the seed of the Gentiles. This isn't cultural preference. The text presents this as divine law, delivered with capital punishment as the prescribed penalty for violation. Dr. Betsy Halpern Amaru's research at Vassar College demonstrates that Jubilees takes the relatively flexible marriage laws in the Pentateuch and makes them dramatically stricter. While the Torah prohibits Israelites from marrying Canaanites, Jubilees extends this to all Gentiles. While Leviticus has laws about marrying within families, Jubilees adds commandments about marrying within specific tribal lines. The narrative context is revealing. Jubilees 30 recounts the story of Dinah and Shechem from Genesis 34, but adds legal material claiming this incident established eternal laws about bloodline preservation. What was descriptive narrative in Genesis becomes prescriptive commandment in Jubilees. Even more striking, Jubilees 41:23-26 includes laws about which tribes can intermarry. According to this text, Moses commanded that Judah should only marry within Judah, Levi within Levi. The text explicitly states, "For thus is it ordained and written in the heavenly tablets regarding all the seed of Israel." For early Jewish communities at Qumran who possessed multiple copies of Jubilees, these weren't historical curiosities. These were binding commandments equal to, "Thou shalt not commit adultery." The community's rule of the community document shows they practiced strict endogamy, marrying only within their sect. But here's where it becomes problematic for institutional Christianity. The Gospel of Matthew traces Jesus' lineage through women who were Gentiles or Canaanites, Rahab, Ruth, Bathsheba. If Jubilees' marriage laws were divine commandments, Jesus' ancestry would include covenant violations. Dr. Christine Hayes from Yale University has documented how early Christianity had to navigate this tension. Paul's letters explicitly argue for inclusion of Gentiles without requiring Jewish law observance. But if Jubilees' marriage commandments were legitimate, Paul's entire missionary strategy violated Mosaic law. The solution? Remove Jubilees from the canon. Let its stringent marriage laws fade into obscurity. Keep the Torah's prohibitions against Canaanite marriages, but eliminate the expanded prohibitions in Jubilees that would classify Roman converts, Greek converts, and ultimately most Christians as covenant violators. Ethiopia preserved these texts precisely because Ethiopian Christianity maintained stricter marriage laws. The Ethiopian Orthodox Church continued practices of religious endogamy that European Christianity abandoned for missionary expansion. What researchers have uncovered is a suppressed legal tradition. Moses allegedly gave commandments about maintaining tribal and ethnic purity that were incompatible with a universal missionary religion, so those commandments were removed. Not because they were inauthentic. Fragments at Qumran prove their ancient origin, not because early Jews and Christians didn't know about them. Patristic writings reference jubilees extensively. They were removed because they were inconvenient for the Christianity that Rome wanted to build. Commandments 13 and 14, maintain bloodline purity, marry only within your covenant community, exist in complete form only in Ethiopian canon. The Dead Sea Scrolls prove Jews once followed them. Their absence from Western Bibles proves someone decided to erase them. You no longer have to carry this weight alone. Awaken to the forgotten truths with the digital book, Why Did the Apostles Hide Jesus' Most Dangerous Words? The link is in the first pinned comment. Click now and receive your copy before it's taken down. In 363 CE, approximately 30 bishops gathered in Laodicea, a city in Asia Minor, for what would become one of the most consequential religious meetings in history. Among the 59 canons they issued, Canon 60 listed the books that Christians were permitted to read as scripture. The Book of Enoch wasn't on that list. Neither was Jubilees, nor 1 Esdras, the Prayer of Manasseh, or several other texts that early Christians had regarded as scripture for 3 centuries. According to church historian Dr. Lee Martin MacDonald from Fuller Theological Seminary, the Council of Laodicea represents the first systematic attempt to create an official, closed biblical canon. Before Laodicea, different Christian communities used different collections of texts. After Laodicea, institutional pressure mounted to conform to an official list. Canon 60 of Laodicea specifically states, it is proper to read the books of the Old Testament. 1. Genesis of the world. 2. The Exodus from Egypt. 3. Leviticus. The list continues through 22 books of the Old Testament, corresponding to the Hebrew Bible, explicitly excluding the expanded collections used by Greek-speaking Christians. But here's what makes this fascinating. Ethiopia wasn't represented at Laodicea. The Ethiopian Orthodox Tewahedo Church, established according to tradition when Philip baptized the Ethiopian eunuch in Acts 8, developed independently from the councils that shaped European Christianity. Dr. Ephraim Isaac's research demonstrates that Ethiopian Christianity was already established with its own liturgy, its own scriptural texts translated into Ge'ez, and its own ecclesiastical structure by the time Laodicea convened. When bishops in Asia Minor decided which books were scripture, Ethiopia was pursuing its own trajectory, 500 miles away. The Council of Carthage in 397 CE reinforced Laodicea's restrictions. The Council of Hippo in 393 CE created similar lists. Each successive council narrowed the canon further, creating increasing pressure on bishops to remove texts from their libraries. Jerome's Latin Vulgate, completed around 405 CE, became the standardization mechanism. Jerome translated only the books approved by these councils. Scribes across Europe copied his Vulgate. Books he excluded simply stopped circulating. Within 2 generations, texts that had been read in churches for centuries became rare curiosities. Dr. Bruce Metzger's authoritative work, The Canon of the New Testament, documents this process meticulously. It wasn't instantaneous censorship. It was gradual obsolescence. Stop copying a text for 50 years, and most copies decay or are lost. Stop for 100 years and only a few remain. Stop for 500 years, and the text effectively no longer exists in Europe. But Ethiopia never stopped copying. Ethiopian monasteries continued producing manuscripts of Enoch, Jubilees, 1 Esdras. Their canon, finalized around the same time European Christianity was narrowing its collection, went in the opposite direction, including more books, not fewer. When Western scholars rediscovered the Book of Enoch in the late 18th century, they found it in Ethiopia. When they sought complete manuscripts of Jubilees, Ethiopia had them. The texts that Laodicea implicitly banned by exclusion had survived in the one Christian tradition that never attended those councils. The evidence suggests that biblical canonization was less about discovering truth and more about institutional standardization. The councils that created the Christian canon were political events as much as theological ones. Unity required uniformity. Diverse textual traditions were obstacles to centralized authority. Ethiopia's distance became its protection. Without Roman roads, without easy communication with Constantinople or Rome, Ethiopian Christianity evolved independently. It preserved texts that councils decided were too problematic for widespread use. The Council of Laodicea didn't just create a biblical canon, it created a template for religious censorship that would persist for centuries. Declare something non-canonical, stop copying it, wait for time to erase it. By the medieval period, most Christians had no idea that their ancestors had once read texts now classified as apocrypha. Ethiopia remembers what Laodicea tried to make the world forget. Where in the world are you watching from? It amazes me that these historical revelations about the Council of Laodicea and Ethiopia's resistance to canonical narrowing are reaching truth seekers across continents. Drop your country or city below. Let's build a global community of investigators who refuse to accept sanitized history. Hidden within the Book of Jubilees is one of the most radical economic commandments ever attributed to Moses, a law so threatening to established power structures that its removal from the biblical canon might have been inevitable. According to Jubilees 23:10-11, Moses received detailed instructions about the Jubilee cycle described in Leviticus 25, but with crucial expansions. And in those days, the children shall begin to study the laws and to seek the commandments, and to return to the path of righteousness. And all their days they shall complete and live in peace and in joy, and there shall be no Satan nor any evil destroyer, for all their days shall be days of blessing and healing. The text connects the Jubilee economic reset, debt forgiveness, land redistribution, liberation of servants, with cosmic restoration. It wasn't just sound economic policy. According to Jubilees, it was the mechanism by which divine order was maintained on earth. Dr. A. John Bergsma from Franciscan University of Steubenville has documented how Jubilees transforms the relatively sparse instructions in Leviticus 25 into a comprehensive economic theology. While Leviticus says debts are forgiven and land returned every 49 years, Jubilees adds that failure to observe this cycle leads to social collapse, moral decay, and eventual divine judgment. Jubilees 50:1-5 makes this explicit. And he blessed the Creator of all things, who had given him this Sabbath day of rest, and the Jubilee when the festivals of the Lord were kept, to bless the Creator of all things, who had given him this day of rejoicing and sanctifying. And he blessed the Creator of all things, who had created him in his generation, for he had created him according to his good pleasure. The implications are staggering. According to this commandment, maintaining economic equality through periodic redistribution wasn't optional charity, it was cosmic law, equal in divine authority to the 10 Commandments. The Qumran community possessed at least 15 manuscript copies of Jubilees, suggesting they considered it authoritative. Scholars believe they attempted to follow its Jubilee calendar literally, creating a community where property was held communally and economic disparities were eliminated. But imagine this commandment surviving into medieval Christianity. Imagine peasants reading that God commanded land redistribution every 49 years. Imagine slaves reading that divine law required their liberation in predictable cycles. Imagine debtors reading that God mandated debt forgiveness. Dr. Norman Gottwald's research on the social world of ancient Israel demonstrates how Jubilee laws represented resistance to economic stratification. They prevented permanent poverty, permanent landlessness, permanent debt slavery. They functioned as a theological check on wealth accumulation, but institutional Christianity aligned itself with imperial Rome, with feudal kingdoms, with economic structures that depended on permanent hierarchies. A biblical commandment requiring periodic economic revolution was incompatible with Christendom's political economy. So Jubilees, with its expanded Jubilee theology, was removed from the canon. Leviticus 25 remained, but as an ancient Israelite curiosity, not a living commandment. Without Jubilee's theological expansion connecting Jubilee observance to cosmic order, the economic reset became optional, theoretical, safely historical. Ethiopia preserved it. Ethiopian Orthodox theology maintains the Jubilee concept as divinely mandated. Their preservation of Jubilees kept alive an economic vision that European Christianity effectively abandoned. What researchers have uncovered is that Moses allegedly received a commandment about economic justice so comprehensive, so threatening to established hierarchies that its suppression might have been Christianity's price for becoming Rome's official religion. Commandment 15, observe the Jubilee economic reset as cosmic law, exists in complete form only in texts preserved in Ethiopia. Its absence from Western Bibles suggests that some laws were removed not because they were false, but because they were too true. You no longer have to carry this weight alone. Awaken to the forgotten truths with the digital book, Why Did the Apostles Hide Jesus' Most Dangerous Words? The link is in the first pinned comment. Click now and receive your copy before it's taken down. The Book of Enoch contains one of the most quoted verses in the entire New Testament, yet the book itself was banned from the biblical canon. This paradox reveals everything about how certain texts became dangerous despite their obvious importance to early Christianity. Jude 1:14-15 explicitly quotes Enoch, and Enoch also, the seventh from Adam, prophesied of these, saying, Behold, the Lord cometh with 10,000s of his saints, to execute judgment upon all, and to convince all that are ungodly among them of all their ungodly deeds, which they have ungodly committed. This isn't a casual allusion. Jude directly attributes this prophecy to Enoch, treating the Book of Enoch as authoritative scripture. Early church fathers did the same. Tertullian, writing around 200 CE, defended Enoch's inspiration. Clement of Alexandria quoted it extensively. Origen referenced it as prophetic. Yet by the 4th century, influential voices turned against Enoch. Jerome dismissed it. Augustine argued it shouldn't be in the canon because of its great antiquity and the difficulty of verifying its authorship. Ironically, its antiquity was precisely why it should have been included, but theological concerns overrode historical arguments. What made Enoch so dangerous? According to Dr. Margaret Barker, former president of the Society for Old Testament Study, the Book of Enoch preserves pre-exilic temple theology that later Judaism and Christianity found uncomfortable. It describes a complex angelic hierarchy. It includes explicit prophecies about Messiah figures. It contains cosmological information about the structure of heaven. Most controversially, it explains the origin of evil through the story of the Watchers, angels who descended to earth, married human women, and corrupted humanity. Enoch 6-11 provides extraordinary detail about these fallen angels. It names them Semjaza, Azazel, Armaros, Barakijal, Kokabel, Ezekiel, Arakiel, Shamsiel, Sariel. It describes what they taught humans: weaponry, cosmetics, sorcery, astrology, divination. The text presents these angels not as symbolic representations of evil, but as actual beings whose rebellion introduced corruption into creation. This theology created problems. If angels could rebel and corrupt humanity, it suggested a dualistic cosmos with competing powers, uncomfortable for a monotheistic faith. If specific angels taught specific sins, it implied knowledge itself could be illicit, dangerous for a religion trying to engage Greek philosophy. Dr. George Nicholsburg from the University of Iowa documented how the Watchers' narrative in Enoch influenced Second Temple Judaism extensively. The Dead Sea Scrolls contain multiple Aramaic fragments of Enoch, proving it was considered scripture at Qumran. The Book of Giants, found at Qumran, expands the Watchers' story from Enoch. Early Christians knew and valued Enoch. Beyond Jude's explicit quotation, scholars have identified probable allusions to Enoch in the Gospels, in 2 Peter, in Revelation. The concepts of 7 archangels, detailed angelic hierarchies, specific fallen angels, these come from Enochic tradition, not from the Hebrew Bible. But as Christianity became institutionalized, Enoch's detailed angelology became problematic. Church councils wanted simplified theology. Debates about angel names and functions seemed like distractions from core doctrines. The Watchers' narrative, with its explanation of evil through angelic rebellion rather than human sin alone, complicated emerging doctrines about the fall. So Enoch was gradually removed, not officially banned at first, just no longer copied, no longer read liturgically, no longer considered authoritative. By the medieval period, European Christianity knew Enoch only through Jude's quotation. The actual book had vanished. Ethiopia preserved it completely. The Ethiopian Orthodox Church maintained the Book of Enoch as fully canonical, equal to Isaiah or Genesis. When Scottish explorer James Bruce brought 3 manuscript copies from Ethiopia to Europe in 1773, it shocked biblical scholarship. A book quoted in the New Testament, lost for over a millennium in Europe, had been preserved intact in Africa. The evidence is irrefutable. Early Christianity valued Enoch. The New Testament quotes it. Church fathers referenced it. Qumran communities possessed it, yet it was suppressed. What Enoch contained, detailed angelology, cosmic geography, explicit messianic prophecies, someone decided was better left hidden from general Christian knowledge. Have you ever felt something important was hidden from you about the pre-flood world, about the origin of evil, and why the world is the way it is? The Book of Enoch claims to answer these exact questions, questions that the canonical Bible only hints at. Share your experience below. Have you read Enoch? Did it change your understanding of biblical history? The Book of Jubilees doesn't just add major theological commandments. It includes dozens of ritual purity laws that dramatically expand the regulations in Leviticus, creating a legal code far more comprehensive than the canonical Torah. According to Jubilees 3:8-14, Moses received explicit instructions about Sabbath observance that go far beyond "remember the Sabbath day to keep it holy." The text specifies that on the Sabbath one must not prepare food, draw water from a well, carry any burden, discuss business, travel beyond prescribed distances, engage in marital relations. Each prohibition is presented as divine mandate revealed to Moses on Sinai. Dr. James Vanderkam's translation and commentary on Jubilees demonstrates how these expanded Sabbath laws match regulations found in later rabbinic literature. But here's the crucial point. Jubilees claims these weren't rabbinical innovations developed centuries after Moses. According to this text, these detailed regulations were part of the original Mosaic revelation. Jubilees 7:20-39 contains extensive dietary laws that expand beyond Leviticus. While Leviticus prohibits eating blood, Jubilees add specific regulations about how animals must be slaughtered, how blood must be drained, and penalties for violations. It even includes a commandment about not eating meat from animals that died of natural causes, a regulation implied but not explicitly stated in the canonical Torah. The text presents these as Commandment 16, Extended Sabbath Observance, and Commandment 17, Expanded Dietary Purity. Perhaps most striking, Jubilees 6:17-22 contains detailed regulations about festival observance, specifying exact dates according to its solar calendar, required rituals and prohibitions. These aren't suggestions for proper worship. They're presented as non-negotiable divine commands, with specific consequences for violation. The Qumran community's Damascus document and community rule show they followed many of these regulations literally. They observed Sabbath laws more strictly than the Jerusalem temple priesthood. They followed dietary regulations that went beyond Leviticus. They calculated festival dates using the solar calendar Jubilees prescribed. But here's where it becomes relevant to biblical canonization. If these expanded purity laws were legitimate Mosaic commandments, then most Jews in the Second Temple period, including Jesus and his disciples, were violating divine law by following less stringent interpretations. The Gospels record Jesus healing on the Sabbath, allowing his disciples to pluck grain on the Sabbath, declaring all foods clean. If Jubilees' Sabbath and dietary commandments were authentic Mosaic law, Jesus was either ignorant of them or deliberately violating them. Dr. John Collins from Yale Divinity School has argued that different Jewish groups in the Second Temple period had genuinely different understandings of Mosaic law. Qumran's strict interpretation, based on texts like Jubilees, wasn't fringe extremism. It was a legitimate reading of expanded legal traditions. But for Christianity, which defined itself partly in opposition to legalistic Judaism, Jubilees' expanded purity laws were problematic. Paul's letters argue that dietary laws and Sabbath observance aren't binding on Christians. But if Jubilee's version of these laws represented authentic Mosaic revelation, Paul was teaching people to violate divine commandments. The solution? Remove Jubilees from the canon. Let its expanded purity laws become a historical curiosity. Maintain the basic Torah laws in Leviticus and Deuteronomy, but eliminate the detailed expansions that would make Christian practice look like covenant violation. Ethiopia preserved these expanded laws in Jubilees. Ethiopian Orthodox practice maintains ritual purity observances more stringent than most Christian traditions, observances that align with Jubilee's commandments. What researchers have documented is a suppressed legal tradition. Moses allegedly revealed detailed purity regulations, Commandments 16, 17, and 18, that were incompatible with Christianity's move away from Jewish legal observance. These commandments exist in complete form only in Ethiopian canon and in fragments at Qumran. Their absence from Western Bibles suggests that some laws were erased not because they were false, but because they were inconvenient for a Christianity trying to distinguish itself from Judaism. The evidence preserved in Ethiopia proves the Mosaic Law was far more comprehensive than the edited version in canonical Bibles. The Council of Rome in 382 CE, convened under Pope Damasus, issued a decree known as the Decretum Gelasianum. This document listed the books accepted as biblical canon, and just as importantly, listed books explicitly rejected. What's fascinating isn't just which books were excluded, it's why the decision was made at that particular moment in history. According to Dr. Bart Ehrman from the University of North Carolina, whose research on early Christianity and textual transmission is widely respected, the late 4th century represented Christianity's transition from persecuted minority to imperial religion. Constantine had legalized Christianity in 313 CE. By 380 CE, Theodosius I made it the official state religion of the Roman Empire. This wasn't just spiritual triumph, it was political transformation. An empire spanning 3 continents needed religious uniformity. Diverse local traditions, varying textual collections, and competing theological interpretations were obstacles to imperial cohesion. The Council of Rome's canon wasn't the result of centuries of careful theological discernment. It was a political decision made in specific historical circumstances. Dr. Lee Martin MacDonald's research demonstrates that different Christian communities had used different collections of texts throughout the 2nd and 3rd centuries. Alexandria had one collection, Antioch another, Carthage another. Rome needed standardization. Jerome's Latin Vulgate project, commissioned by Pope Damasus around the same time, was the mechanism for implementing this standardization. Jerome was explicitly instructed to create a uniform Latin translation that could be distributed throughout the empire. He made deliberate choices about which texts to translate. When Jerome encountered books like Enoch, Jubilees, and 1 Esdras, he classified them as apocrypha, worth reading but not canonical. His reasoning? They didn't exist in the Hebrew Bible used by Jews in Palestine, never mind that they existed in Greek translations used by diaspora Jews, never mind that early Christians had quoted them as scripture. Jerome's criterion was essentially political: create a canon that Jews might respect, that could serve as common ground for Jewish-Christian dialogue. But there's another factor. Dr. David Bracker from Ohio State University has documented how the canonical process also involved defining orthodoxy against heresy. Gnostic Christians used texts like the Gospel of Thomas. Ebionite Christians used different Gospels. Marcionite Christians rejected the Old Testament entirely. By creating an official canon, Rome wasn't just listing inspired books, it was defining which Christian groups were legitimate. Accept these 66 books, later 73 with the deuterocanonical books, and you're orthodox. Use different texts, and you're heretical. The Book of Enoch presented a particular problem. Its detailed angelology and dualistic cosmology resembled Gnostic theology. Its explanation of evil through angelic rebellion, rather than human sin alone, complicated emerging doctrines about the fall and original sin. Its preservation, mainly among groups Rome considered marginal, made it politically suspect. Jubilees had similar issues. Its strict legal observances resembled Ebionite Christianity, which maintained Jewish law while accepting Jesus as Messiah. Rome wanted Christianity distinct from Judaism, not a Jewish sect. Jubilee's comprehensive legal code was incompatible with Paul's theology of grace over law. Dr. Harry Gamble's research on the formation of the Christian Bible demonstrates how canonical decisions reflected power structures. The books chosen were those used by churches in major urban centers with political influence: Rome, Carthage, Alexandria. Texts preserved primarily in rural areas, in non-Latin-speaking regions, or in theologically marginal communities were excluded. Ethiopia was distant, non-Latin-speaking, and politically marginal to Rome. Its textual traditions simply weren't considered in the canonical process. When Rome chose 66 books, Ethiopia wasn't at the table. The evidence suggests biblical canonization was less about discovering divine truth and more about creating religious uniformity for political purposes. An empire needed standardized scripture. Books that complicated that standardization, whether by resembling rival theologies, by imposing inconvenient laws, or by simply being used by the wrong Christian communities, were excluded. This doesn't mean the excluded books are necessarily inspired, but it proves the included books weren't chosen purely on theological merit. Politics, imperial needs, and ecclesiastical power struggles shape the Bible you hold today, as much as divine guidance. Ethiopia's canon preserves what Rome chose to exclude, not because Ethiopian Christians were more inspired, but because they were beyond Rome's political reach. The canonical Bible is an edited collection, and the editorial decisions were made for reasons we can now document historically. Today, in monasteries perched on cliffs in northern Ethiopia, monks continue a tradition that stretches back 17 centuries. They copy manuscripts, they study texts, they preserve a biblical canon that the rest of Christianity abandoned over 1,500 years ago. The Ethiopian Orthodox Tewahedo Church maintains approximately 800 Awarazarand manuscripts, making it the largest repository of Christian manuscripts in Africa. According to the Ethiopian Manuscript Imaging Project, led by Dr. Steve Delamata, most of these manuscripts have never been digitally catalogued, translated, or studied by Western scholars. What remains hidden in Ethiopian monastery libraries? Researchers have identified complete copies of texts that exist elsewhere only as fragments, variant readings of canonical books that predate European manuscripts by centuries, commentaries by early church fathers whose works were lost in Europe, liturgical texts showing how 4th century Christians actually worshipped. But most intriguingly, Ethiopian monks speak of texts they won't allow scholars to photograph or remove. According to Dr. Ephraim Isaac, some monastery libraries contain sections that remain completely closed to outsiders. The monks say these texts are too sacred, too powerful, or too easily misunderstood to be shared with the world. This isn't paranoia. It's learned caution from a church that watched European Christianity suppress the very texts Ethiopia preserved. Why would Ethiopian Christians trust Western scholars to handle sensitively what those scholars' ancestors tried to destroy? The Ark of the Covenant, according to Ethiopian tradition, rests in the Church of Our Lady Mary of Zion in Axum. One guardian monk, appointed for life, protects it. No one else is allowed to see it. Scholars can request, negotiate, offer money. The answer is always no. Whether or not the actual Ark resides there, the tradition reveals something profound. Ethiopian Christianity sees itself as guardian of sacred things the rest of the world lost or abandoned. The Ark, the complete book of Enoch, the full Jubilees, a comprehensive biblical canon. These aren't historical curiosities to Ethiopian Christians. They're living spiritual treasures. Recent digitization efforts have made some Ethiopian manuscripts accessible online. The Institut Français d'Archéologie Orientale has photographed thousands of pages. The British Library holds microfilm of key texts, but these represent perhaps 10 to 15% of Ethiopia's manuscript heritage. What lies in the other 85%? Dr. Getachew Haile, who spent decades cataloging Ethiopian manuscripts, documented apocryphal Acts of Apostles, unknown patristic commentaries, and texts whose titles don't match any known work. Some appear to be unique to Ethiopia. Others might be copies of texts presumed completely lost. The Ethiopian Orthodox Church isn't a museum preserving dead traditions. It's a living faith community for millions of believers who use these lost books in actual worship. They chant from Enoch during liturgies. They read jubilees during festivals. They study 1 Esdras as scripture. This means the commandments hidden in these texts aren't just academic curiosities. They're living religious law for a Christian community that never stopped following them. What would happen if the remaining 85% of Ethiopian manuscripts were fully translated and publicized? What other lost commandments might emerge? What other expansions of biblical law might be documented? The evidence suggests that what we call complete biblical studies is actually fragmentary, limited to texts that survived in Europe or appeared in controlled translations. Ethiopian Christianity preserves an alternative textual tradition that predates European canonization, and most of it remains unstudied. The guardians continue their watch. In mountain monasteries, in ancient churches, in priestly libraries, they copy, preserve, and protect what their ancestors kept safe for 17 centuries. They preserved Moses' lost commandments when Rome tried to erase them. They maintained Enoch's prophecies when Jerome excluded them. They copied jubilees when Europe forgot it existed. What else are they guarding? Subscribe to this channel and hit the bell icon so you don't miss future revelations. We've only begun uncovering the truths preserved in Ethiopian manuscripts. The next video will explore specific prophecies in the Book of Enoch that early Christians believed, but later councils suppressed. And if you truly feel called to go deeper, consider joining as a member. Our community is already accessing research, manuscript translations, and discussions we can never make fully public. We examine the actual texts. We read scholarly journals. We support each other in understanding these complex historical revelations. The truth isn't hidden anymore, but it requires commitment to seek it. Thanks for watching until the end. You've just completed a journey through 1700 years of suppressed biblical history. If these discoveries have challenged your understanding, if you feel something awakening in your spirit, if you're ready to know what else was hidden, come back here and write truth. That single word will mark you as someone who refuses to accept incomplete history, someone who demands evidence, someone who honors the Ethiopian guardians who preserved what others tried to destroy. I'll see you in the next investigation.